We had it so good in the naughty.
This is the Renault Sport Clio 182, and this is the EP3 Honda Civic Type R. And in today's world, they remind us why the death of hot hatches like these is a very bad thing.
So we were wrong. We got it really wrong.
These cars were absolute bargains, because back in the early noughties, the list price of a Renault Sport Clio barely tipped into double figures, while the Honda's price was less than a third of what its present-day successor costs.
Although, if you convert that into today's money, you'll quickly realise that their prices aren't that far off what you would pay for a Ford Fiesta ST back when it was still on sale, or a Hyundai i20N. Unless, of course, you find one of those on Cinch, where you'll naturally make a hefty saving. But it doesn't matter where you're looking, it was clear back then that these two cars offered an enormous amount of performance for the pounds. You could say they were massively over-engined, because both of them had 4 cylinders in 2-litre motors. And in fact, this one had racing pedigree, because the F4R Renault Sport block was actually used in Formula Renault single-seaters. So in the Clio, it had 182 horsepower and 200 Nm of torque. Although when it comes to numbers, well, the Civic definitely wins that battle, because this K20 motor had 200 horsepower and 197 Nm of torque, but it also revved to 8,250 RPM. And that's thanks to a neat trick this engine has up its sleeve, and that's called variable valve timing lift electronic control, which effectively has meant that this is a 2-engine car. You've got your sensible 4-cylinder that's nice and fuel efficient, and then you've got your race engine for the road. Although, just by looking at them, you wouldn't know that these two went racing. I mean, look at the Civic. When it launched, motor journalists said it looked like a bread van, or worse, like the Renault Scenic MPV. And then the Clio, well, if you pulled off the French racing blue paint and put it in a normal colour, well, it kind of looks like the Clio you might have learned to drive in. No, to tell that these two are the sportier models, you have to be a nerd, like Ben.
I'll take that as a compliment. So on this later EP3, you'll notice a few significant styling upgrades, including the body kit. So you get the spoiler here, bumper down there, red badging here, sort of Pokemon style Type R badging, which is quite cool. And then all Civic Type Rs came with these dual exhausts here. Some people put the oversized sprinkle cans on. I'm not the biggest fan, but that's just my opinion. Different lights on this later model. Around here, you've got the sportier wheels there and the body kit there, again, with Type R badging. I like it, but I think Sam might prefer the Clio.
I mean, yeah, Ben's giving away that I'm a bit biased because, as you probably guessed, this is actually my Clio, hence the number plate. But I have to admit, or I think I should say, I think it's a good looking car, even if it wasn't mine. And that's because it's got subtle racy bits on it. I mean, the Civic's got bits stuck onto its bumpers. This got its own unique bumpers. So you've got proper 182 bumpers here and space for 2 exhaust pipes. The standard exhaust, by the way, is made of chocolate. So most owners have replaced them. I've gone for a stainless steel one here, which makes a bit more noise. You'll also have spotted there is the Renault Sport badge down there. Some of you may remember that Halfords actually sold that Sport badge on the exit till. I don't know why Renault didn't own the rights to that badge. Halfords was offering it. Anyway, you also got a set of 16-inch wheels. The Honda got 17s, this got 16s. I actually swapped them out for the 172 Cup wheels. You normally got 16s that look a bit more like dustbin lids. And then around the side of the car, I mean, obviously it's French racing blue, but it's pretty standard until you get up to the front where you spot these wider, much more muscular front wings. And that's because they're hiding a wider track underneath. And interestingly, they're made of plastic. Look, they're really flimsy. But that actually means that they're light. And in fact, actually, I'm reaching over down there. Let me show you and prove that they're plastic. This won't stick to that. Look, it's fallen off, but it will stick to the Honda there, my magnetic strap. And that helps to ensure that this car, with its 200-kilogram lighter weight, is just as quick as the Civic in a straight line. Or at least it was 20 years ago.
Things have certainly moved on a lot since 2004, but these cars look positively featherweight compared to today's turbocharged and electrified performance machines. So surely, the Honda in particular, with its VTEC power plant, must still feel rapid, right?
It feels quite slow, actually. This Civic Type R, when you put your foot down, doesn't really pick up that quickly, and the VTEC motor, well, it just feels like any old 4-cylinder. But then you remember, this is a car from over 20 years ago, and you're in the wrong gear. Drop a couple, and it really wakes up, and I mean, really, really, really wakes up. 8,250 revs is not a number we see these days in anything under a Porsche or some kind of crazy supercar. And this is in a family car shaped like a bread van. Wow! And this VTEC motor, of course, is matched to such a fabulous 6-speed gearbox, and I mean one of the greatest ever, not least because the ratios are so tightly stacked, and they have to be, of course, to ensure that engine remains on the boil, but also so that you can just have more fun. You're constantly changing gear, and on a twisty, narrow B road like the one we're on here, I've got a lot of work to do, but that's what makes it so engaging. And also, the thing that Honda nailed, and still nails to this day, but really especially nailed in this EP3, was the control weighting and positioning. Not only have I got this small and light steering, but I've also got a gear knob placed just a handspan away from the steering wheel rim. The rim and the knob are perfectly separated. So it means I can put my foot down, wait for the engine to get to its completely bonkers zone, and then I can quickly shift my hand from gear lever to steering wheel, like a race driver. It doesn't half handle badly either. I mean, this Civic is bigger and heavier, like I said, than the Clio, but it goes round bends nice and positively. The steering is light, but I've got feel from this hydraulic rack. Not tons of the stuff, but enough that I know there's grip from this car's Bridgestones. And it rides over this bumpy British B road pretty well. It's probably firm by 2005 standards, but by 2024 hot hatch standards, when everything has to be rock solid to control its heft, well, this rides down a road so smoothly.
But obviously, we didn't come to beautiful Wales to talk about ride comfort. We came here to really drive these cars. And handily, this Type R loves to be driven hard. With a chassis that's so composed, it constantly eggs you on to push harder.
Case in point, when you find a little hairpin like this, in this Civic, you can just tip it in, get down the gears, oh, lovely gearbox, and you feel the back end come around. It just starts to come around on you, but the car doesn't wallow around on its tail. It feels nice and controlled, but allows you to adjust it. It's playful. And I can't even find how to turn off the electronic stability control in this Civic. I mean, there are no visible buttons on the dash to do it. So I guess it's still on, and yet it's still playful. There are no such problems in the Clio because the ESP button couldn't be more obviously located. It is just to the right of the steering wheel because it's almost like Renault Sport is so confident in this car's handling that they wanted you to turn it off. And thank God they did, because when you do, you can do this. The 182 with its shorter wheelbase, its lighter weight, I mean 200 kg is like a grand piano out of this car versus the Civic, and you really feel it because the car feels super alert and hyperactive. And yes, I know, I have modified this a little bit, but of course it still has the standard car's character, and I know because I ran it in standard tune for about 6 years. So it means the balance of the car is all about turning, and that's true whether you're lift off oversteering into a bend or even when you're powering out of the corner. The Clio just scrabbles out of a bend and the rear of the car just kind of clings on and has a laugh while it's doing it.
And when you're really on it, compared to the playful but pretty stable Civic, the Clio feels wild.
Say my car is wilder still because I have fitted a limited slip diff to the front axle, so now it doesn't just pull you out the bends, it drags you around them. But handling has always been a Clio's sweet spot. Think of all of the Renault Sport generations made in DF. Well, they've always had great chassis, but the engines in these cars haven't always been the best in class. It doesn't quite have the eventfulness or the explosiveness up top like that Honda motor.
Don't get me wrong, the Renault Sport F4R is best when you work it hard, but you've 1,000 fewer revs to play with than with the Honda's K20. And with just 5 gears, the Clio's ratios are longer, meaning you're forced to lean into the engine's torque rather than chasing the red line as you power out of the bends. Neither is the Clio's gearbox as enjoyable to operate as the Civic's, partly because the gear knob itself is more than a handspan away from the wheel, and also because the lever's throat is longer, with a less tactile shift action.
Oh yeah, and of course the suspension on this car, the Bilstein B14s I've got fitted, are much firmer than standard at slow speed. At higher speed they actually soften up and it rides quite nicely, but if you're cruising along like I am now, well, it gets a bit fidgety and a bit firm. But you know what? You don't really care, because once you get used to it, it's all good, and what you're focused on is just how good this car handles. That's quite different to that Honda is the seating position. The Honda one was great and very low down, but in my car it's even better. I'm really low with this wheel nice and close, but I have to admit, none of it's standard.
But while you and I probably know that, at just 24 years of age, our Ben isn't old enough to remember the standard Clio's slightly problematic cabin.
This isn't stock, is it, Sam?
No, yeah, you have correctly identified, obviously, that this car does have quite a few extra features, a few modifications. I mean, the steering wheel in the standard car, you might not know, was massive and really, really uncomfortable, and it was placed much closer to the dash, so it would have been like holding a ship's helm. And then you would have had a seat that actually looked quite nice. I really like the design of the standard seats, but they were really big and they sat you really high. So at 6'3", Ben, you would have been, you know, your head would have been touching the top of the car, and it would have been sat like you would have been sat in a bar stool position, basically.
I was about to say, these seats are really comfortable. And I've also noticed you've got lots of switches here as well, lots of extra buttons.
Yes, actually, that's a good point. I have actually kept all of the standard features of the car that I think were brilliant for a 2004, effectively a Super Mini, albeit one with a 2-litre engine and some sporty chassis stuff. It had, as standard in 2004, it had, I was about to say adaptive cruise control. It had cruise control, a speed limiter, so that's what those things do. But then you also got xenon headlights that were automatic, and you also got automatic wipers as well, plus climate control. So in 2004, you know, that was the sort of stuff you got on a nicely spec BMW, not on a Renault or a Super Mini, although these ones did come with it.
Clearly must have been high spec as well, because they've still got this awful looking volume control here that you still find on Dacia Dusters today.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that Renault's kind of been like, if it works, we'll stick with it. If it ain't broke, etc. So that is a feature that has been evolved very lightly and still features in the current Clio.
There's not actually much space in the back either when you look at it. But I guess
Tiny car.
Small car, isn't it?
That is the big compromise, and actually versus the Honda, one of the biggest areas. I mean, this car was obviously £2,000 cheaper than the Honda when new, but you really did notice it when it came to the space. Much less room in the back, smaller boot, and let's be frank, the fit and finish. I mean, the plastics in this car, you know, bit scratchy here and a bit loose there. They came as standard with rattles.
Things are quite a bit different in the Honda.
Well, you sit in this interior and it's instantly much better than the Clio.
Yeah, I have to admit, the Honda interior is way nicer. I mean, it is like night and day in terms of build quality. Rock solid, isn't it? This is a nearly 20-year-old car, and it feels like it came out of the factory. In Swindon, I should say, actually. Just yesterday. British built, and you wouldn't know it because it's really, really nicely done.
And my favourite bit here is the cup holders. So obviously you've got a cup holder back here, great. But then down here, you've got two more. And because the gear stick's so high up, you're not knocking your drinks when you're changing gear, which is very nice. And then over there, next to the steering wheel, you've got one that comes out there.
Like a Porsche. That is actually really cool. The ergonomics is actually where this car, I mean, the feeling and everything and the quality is great, but actually when you drive in the car, it's the ergonomics that every time you use something, you go, God, they really thought this through, and brilliantly so. Like my favorite thing, obviously I love the fact that the gear knob's really close to the wheel, as I said earlier, but I also love that the climate control knobs are right next to the wheel too. So you're driving along and you're like, oh no, I've got mist coming up. You just quick click of the switch and you've got the aircon on off, and you can just do everything really quickly. There's no looking away from the road. It is the complete opposite of a 2024 Volkswagen climate control system in that this one is easy to use night or day.
There's no dodgy screens in here. Well, it's a very small digital analog, but yeah, it's good.
And these seats as well, I have to say. I mean, I have modified Recaros in mine. These standard ones are way more comfortable. These are lovely. They're really supportive, aren't they? They look great in the Civic Type R red. And the fact that I'm sat a little bit higher than I'd like, but still much lower than you would be in the original Clio seat, means I can be nice and comfortable with this lovely Momo steering wheel. And I mean, it looks great and it feels great as well. Honestly, ergonomically, 10 out of 10 this car. And aesthetically, I mean, dials are cool, aren't they?
The red accents really make this car.
And you've also got a good amount of rear space. I mean, way more than you have in that little Clio. You can tell this is the bigger car, and the boot as well. Even in 2024, this is an easy car to live with.
I've done a few hundred miles in this now, and the seats are great. positioning's great, boot space, yeah, everything is perfect.
Alright, I'll admit that my rose-tinted spectacles are particularly thick in these cars, and the reality of running modern classics is obviously not all plain sailing. Both of these cars' engines are bulletproof if maintained, but a cam belt service can cost way over £600 every few years, and road tax is an eye-watering £400 per year.
But even with those financial challenges, you only have to spend 15 seconds behind the wheel of one of these cars, especially on a British B road as fabulous as the ones in this Elan Valley in central Wales, to realise how perfect these hot hatches are for Britain. These are the sweet spot of the British performance car.
Of course, Honda still makes a fantastic Civic Type R, and the Renault Sport Clio has just been spiritually succeeded by a terrific Alpine A290. I love both of those cars, but the Honda is 50 grand, and the electric Alpine lacks the revs, rawness and range of its forebears. And before you think I've forgotten the new Mini John Cooper works, at 31 grand and 1,330 kilos, it's too premium and too heavy to stay true to this lineage.
So we were wrong. We got it really wrong. We stopped buying little nimble hot hatches that were perfect for Britain, and we moved to bigger, heavier cars with big numbers, but cars that weren't so well suited to our country. And so manufacturers listened and they said, we'll stop making them.
So when the Ford Fiesta ST and Hyundai i20N bowed out of production, we didn't just lose two great cars. We closed a chapter of affordable, compact hot hatches that spanned half a century. If 2024 told us anything, it's that the future of the hot hatch looks safe. But hot hatches with the B-road brilliance and affordability of these old rivals? Put it this way.
We had it really, really good in the noughties.